Hello, I'm Michelle Leduc Catlin. Welcome to episode 5 of season 2 of Trued Up, the podcast that invites you to be the change. Joseph Campbell's advice to follow your bliss moved millions of people. The simplicity and elegance of living a life in pursuit of that which fulfills your soul is profound. But how do you find your bliss? Years ago, I heard Elizabeth Gilbert offer this pragmatic approach: follow your curiosity. My guest today is a perfect example of this practice leading to an extraordinary and expansive life. Brett Hawes is a functional medicine and nutrition expert who has been an outspoken advocate for health for decades. His journey from South Africa to the UK music industry to the First Nations of Canada is a fascinating one. He was among the first to speak out about COVID and the so-called vaccines and participated in the Inspired Global Leadership Summit in Geneva last year, where I got to know him a little better. It was our diverse and enriching conversations that had me invite him to be my honored guest on Trued Up. Okay, where do we even start this conversation? So, Brett, since we had that day in Geneva, we shared a day in Geneva together, and I got to hear you talking about health, but not just health from a personal perspective, but some very big, deep, wide ideas. So I'm so grateful to you for this conversation, because I think you have huge amounts of insight and information to share with people. So that's the first thing.
Oh, thank you. I appreciate that. And yes, that was a great day. I'm glad that we had a day of downtime to sightsee and meet some awesome local people and get to know each other. Yeah.
Yeah. So you have been in health for a very long time, but I would like you to just go back to how you started this health journey, when you started it, why you started it.
I have a very unconventional way of getting into it. So a lot of people in my space will sort of have the hero's journey where I got super sick and then I discovered natural medicine and healed myself. And here I am today helping others. That is not my story at all. I was actually, this is going to sound really bizarre, but I have a background in music, right? So I actually studied sound engineering in London in the late 90s. And I landed up producing music and traveling all over the world. And I rolled with a very eclectic, out there kind of crowd. And so it took me to some very far out places. And I always kind of sought out the places that were off the beaten track, right? So spending a lot of time with indigenous people in different parts of the world. And the music itself just sort of had this very subculture, hippie, spiritual kind of overtones, if you will, right? That was the culture. So from a young age, I got drawn into the spiritual side of things, and I started learning more about Eastern philosophies. And then, always had this sort of fascination with the spiritual side of things. And lo and behold, when I came to Canada, I got brought out here a couple of times for music first, and then met that group of people here. But the first time I ever came to Canada, I said, can someone take me to the indigenous people here? I would like to go and meet them and hang out with the people. Where are they? And no one knew where they were, right? And people were like, we don't know any First Nations people. And I was like, oh, okay. So anyway, when I moved here eventually, my ex-wife was Canadian. That's how I came to be here. It was a convergence of things that happened. The first one was I got this random email or text message one day, and it said, hey, I know you want to, connect with First Nations people here. There's a ceremony going on this weekend. You need to be there. So here's where we're meeting. Hop on the bus and come with us. And so I came with. And the rest, as they say, is history, because after that weekend, it was spending time in the lodge, a 2 or 3 day ceremony at that time. And at the end of that ceremony, one of the elders, Frank, looked at me and said, welcome home. And I was like, wow. And I landed up living and working with them for 7 years as part of the core sort of family there. But at the same time, around that time, like I was going through a lot of spiritual transformation, a lot of sort of searching and these types of things. And I got a calling to help people, right? So in my early 20s, it was like, you got to help people. That's why you're here. And I didn't know how I was going to do that. So the vehicle was not there at all. I had been working with the First Nations people, and a friend of mine was wrapping up his studies in nutrition. And so we started chatting. I met him through the music scene. And so we started talking. And I had no health issues whatsoever. I was in great health. I still am. And I sort of said to myself, maybe I should just enroll in nutrition school. Like, what the hell? Why not? Right. And I thought, this would be good for me, good for my family, just cool stuff to know. And within 6 months, I was practicing. So I enrolled into school, started practicing, and that was it. Like there, paint the road forward from there. I just immersed myself into the field. And 20 years later, here I am.
Wow. Okay. So before we go into all the health stuff, I have to go back. I just love the whole First Nations connection. I've spent some time with some First Nations people in some ceremonies as well. But I understand that did you actually do a vision quest?
I've done lots of different things. Yes, vision quests. They don't always call them vision quests, but also spending time out on the land. So doing 4-day stretches where you're just out by yourself, just you and the fire. You got to keep the fire alive. Did a lot of sweat lodges, a lot of different types of ceremonies. So there'd be different ceremonies at different times of the year. So you would do like a ghost dance, which would be for the ancestors. Sometimes you might do like a thunderbird sweat at certain times of year. So it would really depend on what was happening. Yeah. So
what were your main lessons, takeaways from that experience?
Well, one of the interesting things with that, which, so remember, I'm coming out of like many years of sort of studying more of the Eastern philosophies, right? And what I came to realize was the Eastern philosophies are very ascension based. And what I mean by that, it's very much about like ascending. It's very ethereal. It's very cerebral in a sense, where it's almost like philosophical in a way.
Yeah.
And then when I started learning more about the First Nations, their like culture and their spiritual system, if you want to call it that, it's very, very earth based. So they would actually learn more from the things around them, So you would learn from the animals and teachings about the wolf and teachings about the bear and what does the cedar teach us and 4 directions medicine and these types of things. So everything was very much like tethered to the land, which was very good for me because if I look at myself through a constitutional lens, through like Chinese medicine, through Ayurvedic medicine, I don't have a lot of grounding in me, right? So I'm also a Libra, so I'm an air sign, so I can just fly away. Like I got,
Me too.
yeah. So keeping my feet on the ground, and also after years of travel and stuff like that, it took me a long time to actually just get settled and be okay with staying in one place. So I found that like the more of the earth-based sort of teachings really helped in that sense, because I could see it around me. But I think, it was just a pivotal time in my life. Like, I just think it was the time in my life, the age that I was at, where I was at, trying to figure out where I was going to go. And so, again, that calling paired with just being in that community of people where, I was sitting with, like, Chief of the Mohawks, like people that sit in the longhouse kind of thing. And here I am, like, young, I was young. And they looked at me and they told me some very crazy things about myself, and it took me a long time to kind of like come to terms with what they were telling me, because your ego wants to run wild and you're sort of going like, are you sure you're talking about me? Like, why are you guys saying these things?
What kinds of things did they tell you?
Well, just one example, and I say this with the utmost humility because I still don't understand why, but just I remember one day being around the fire. And it wasn't in ceremony. We were just talking, and the one of the elders kind of looked at me and started crying. And she said, you're the one we've been praying for. And I was like, why would you say that? Like I don't understand. And when I got given my spiritual name in a naming ceremony, the whole lodge went silent. Like it was literally like the oxygen got sucked out the room, and everyone was like, oh, and I was like, why? Like, what's going on? I'm looking around like it's just a name. And then I came to understand what my name meant, and they said, you're not going to understand your name right now, but as you get older, you'll grow into that name and you'll understand what that name means. And so little things like that, where you just like have to like check yourself as well. But it taught me humility. It taught me a lot about like just like really keeping your ego intact. You know what I mean? And not getting super wrapped up in like who you are and where you're going. And it's a lot of it is surrendering. There's being a vehicle. Being a vehicle really is what it is.
So I'm struck by that in these times that we live in, because we see so much ego and people who are wanting to do good, wrapped up in that. What is it? Well, first of all, I have to ask, what's your spirit name?
I haven't shared this for a really, really long time. So it's you'll see it on my not Instagram, on Twitter handle. I go by the name of the Tamarack Man. Okay, so the full name is Tall Standing Golden Tamarack Man. Okay, so it's a real long one. So the tamarack is a tree, first of all. So the tamarack tree has very, very potent medicine in the First Nations traditions, right? You actually do use it as medicine, depending on what you're using it for. But the golden part was interesting. So the tamarack tree is only golden at a certain time of year, okay? And when it's golden, it has the most potent medicine. So they told me that my tree was born golden, okay? And then they said tall standing, I'm tall, I'm 6'4", but tall standing is also, they said like at some point you'll move away from the city because the tamarack tree grows to twice its size when it's out in the wild, as opposed to, and so I, like coincidentally about 9 years ago, I moved out and I moved to a small town. So, and now I'm kind of finding myself after all these years, I'm like in a completely different headspace and spiritual space and everything else. And so anyway, so that's a little bit about what it means. And so they always said to me, they say, you carry very potent medicine. And I've seen that in the work that I've done. And I've also seen that in maybe some of the things we'll talk about today is just in the quote unquote activist space as well, really trying to make change in the world. I kind of see that, but I really keep myself in check. I don't think about that all the time. It's not like I sit there every morning and wonder about it. I just do it. It's just who I am.
I want to get to the activist part, because just to tie back into what we were just talking about the ego, that I think it's human nature that when we have an idea or a goal, a dream, a vision, that we can easily get sucked into the egoic side. It becomes 100%. Like a thing. What is it? What do you think is missing, wanted, needed at this time that you can take from that time, that learning?
Well, where do I start with that? I've said this for some time now, and you and I have had conversations about this, like 100% egos get in the way all the time. And I think there's a couple of angles to take this in, right, or to look at it from. Years ago in 2007, 2008, I founded, together with some friends, we founded a coalition called the Canadian Natural Health Coalition. And suddenly after, I won't get into all the details, but, I found myself chairing a group of people who were like veteran freedom fighters and what have you in the natural health space. And suddenly I'm the guy sitting at the table, like chairing all these meetings. And I was the youngest guy by 10 or 15 years. And I was like, why am I the person up front, like chairing this? Like, surely one of you folks should be up here and I'll be in the seats, But anyway, I was called to do it and they stuck me up there. And that coalition, it was a real powerful teaching moment for me because I watched that coalition disintegrate in a few short months. And the reason why was everyone's egos started getting in the way. Everyone had their own micro agenda. This is more important. No, this is more important. And then you start all the infighting and then everything, So people lose sight of the bigger picture. They lose sight of the forest for the trees. And what that does is it completely derails the bigger mission, whatever that mission is. And I've seen this play out across everything. It doesn't really matter what the mission is. It always happens. And I think on a more metaphysical, like higher level, whatever you want to call it, I think that, as you know, I've said this for a long time, like we're in a spiritual war, and spiritual wars require spiritual solutions. And I feel that, when you start getting into it, like start getting into Kundalini and these types of things and the chakra system, like humanity is stuck in the lower three chakras. We're stuck in the root, the sacral, and the not the heart chakra, but the root, sacral, solar plexus. And what those are the three base chakras. Those are like your primal chakras in a sense. So like one is survival, right? One is reproduction, and one is my personal power. So, can I eat it? Can I have sex with it? Can I kill it? Okay, those are very primal, animalistic type of chakras, but they're crucial for our survival. And what's happened, is if we're to really transcend this time that we're in and build the world that we really want to see, collectively there needs to be some type of spiritual or revolution in consciousness. And a big part of that is moving those lower three chakras up, because the top four chakras are, my crown chakra is obviously connection to source. Your brow chakra is my perception. So how am I perceiving the world? How am I taking in the world? How am I interpreting things and digesting them? Then you've got your expression, which is your throat. So can I take all of this stuff in? Can I think about it? Can I process it? Then can I express myself properly? Which, take a look around. I think most people are not. And then, the center of it all is the heart. And so your heart chakra, when you move personal power up into the heart, it becomes the power of love. So like, why are we doing the things that we're doing? You know what I mean? And so I think that as we move these lower, with people being stuck in those lower three chakras, take a look at aggression, take a look at polarization, take a look at online attacks, take a look at pornography, take a look at survival and just trying to keep yourself together on a day-to-day basis. That is where people are stuck. And so, I don't have a simple answer in terms of a solution there, but that's kind of my take on a lot of the stuff,
I think that even just the awareness, like what you said, was just so powerful. It's the reason for this podcast, because there's many people who do a phenomenal job of sharing information. For me, what I'm very interested in is the being side. We're human beings. And again, I hear people say it's a spiritual war, and yet they're functioning in with material world tactics.
Yeah.
So I think the first step to, moving that energy is awareness. Would you agree with that?
It is. I mean, it's awareness. It's also awareness of self, right? Because like, you can't control what other people do. The only thing you can control is your response. And so we can consume, we're just in this world where we are inundated with information. Like, it's information overload, it's narrative warfare. And it's very easy to just like try and consume all of this and try and make sense of it all. But what that does is it leads to a lot of fear, a lot of anxiety, a lot of anger, a lot of helplessness, hopelessness. And like, that's ultimately your response to it all. So how do you balance that out? How do you navigate that? Yeah, it's tough. It's tough. It's not easy. And I think that for most of us, even people that have got a good handle on things, they still, from time to time, I mean, I've spoken to plenty of people who are very visible, who are very smart, who are very active and all that sort of stuff. And they also have a very difficult time with this, So I think it's just part of the human condition, to be honest.
So let's go to what you do about it. So how is it that you deal with all of that, both personally and professionally?
Yeah, I think on a personal level, like the way that I look at it, and this is sort of really like drawing from the Buddhist teachings, is I have no expectations. Right. So I have no expectations. I don't know what's going to happen tomorrow. I can't think too much about the future. If I can just try and live my life like one day at a time. My wife hates me for it because she's like, don't you remember that we're doing this thing in 2 weeks? I'm like, nope, I actually don't know it all. It'll come up on the calendar kind of thing. So sometimes I'm a little too present. But I think that just being present and not thinking too much and ruminating over what might be in the future, I think is really important. When you have expectations, you're always going to be let down. You know, what I mean, it's really like that. So it's like, it's easy for us to say, hey, if I do all of this work and if we just keep pushing forward and if we just do these things, then these things will happen. It just doesn't really work like that, you know, because we're dealing with very, very complex things and we don't have control over those things, right? So that's one side of things. And I think the other thing is, you know, the most important thing that you can do and the most important thing for you to do is to manage your own personal life. So like what's happening in your home, right? What's happening in your home? What's happening with the relationships with your children, with your family, these types of things? Because, you know, the last 4 years has thrown a wrench in a lot of these relationships. And I get it. It's tough. You know, we've all experienced it. But ultimately, like, you know, what you see online is probably 100 times worse than what's actually happening in real life. Okay, it's just the way that social media algorithms work. It's the way the news cycle works. So what I try and do, you know, historically people would always get their worldview and their information would be based on their immediate surroundings. You know, it would be their family, their friends, their community, what's happening in my town, what am I seeing actually happening in front of me? And I think what's happened now is that you actually have most people's worldview is shaped by the media they consume and what the social media algorithms are showing them. And so as that becomes more amplified, it's actually our perception of reality becomes so distorted that it's easy for us to go, holy smokes, like everything is just falling apart at the seams and it's the apocalypse is here and it's game over in the next week. And then you sort of turn around and you go, oh, cool, here's my kids and here's my wife and oh, we're going to go outside and have a barbecue and let's go for a bike ride or what have you. So, you know, so that stuff's not really matching up anymore. So I try and sort of keep myself like tethered to reality in a sense, especially as we get further into the digital age. And so, so I find that kind of helps me in a sense. You know, from a professional standpoint, I don't really know how to answer that because I've always been outspoken. Like, you know, if anyone's known me for any period of time, I'm a straight shooter. Like, what you see is what you get. I call a spade a spade. I don't really care where the chips fall. You know, I'm not going to lie to people. So, you know, so I've taken a lot of heat from my own profession. And that was hard, like, especially in the pandemic. But even prior to that, you know, you just get people like, oh my gosh, this guy's some lunatic anti-vaxxer or what have you. And so the personal attacks, like, sure, I mean, we're human beings, like it's hard to deal with. But I find that now the climate has changed so much. You know, the environment we're in now is very, very different from March 2020. And so I find it's actually easier now to sort of have have discussions that are perhaps a bit more contentious or that are maybe a bit more conspiratorial, because your average person in the street now is starting to go, well, hang on. Like, what I'm hearing on the news is actually not really what I'm seeing in reality. And I'm hearing different things from my friends, you know? So, yeah, so that's kind of how I manage things on a professional level. But honestly, I've kind of been right out front for like long before the pandemic, you know, for many years. So I feel that there's, you know, I've got a good group of people around me, and there's people that don't like me or think I'm crazy, and that's okay too.
So tell us some of your crazy. What's so controversial? What is it that you do, say, stand for that is, you know?
Yeah, I mean, there's, you know, no shortage of topics, right? And I think, you know, look, the vaccine issue has been a long-standing, ongoing debate. I've been in that space for a really, really long time. Okay, I'm not going to divulge too much more in terms of personal information, but I started reading up about this stuff probably 20, 25 years ago. So for me, when the whole COVID thing happened, it was it was a shock in terms of what they did, in terms of the measures that were implemented. But I wrote an article in April of 2020, which was why we will never find a coronavirus vaccine. And I wrote it out. I haven't edited it. It's still up there on my website. I don't know, within a couple of weeks, it was 500,000 hits. And I explained exactly why we will never find one. And to date, we haven't found one that actually works, that's safe and effective. So, you know, but the backstory of that is like, you know, if you understand the origins of vaccinations, like where did they come from? Like where these things didn't spontaneously just appear. And so when you start getting into the origins of vaccinations, when you start getting into eugenics, when you start looking at the Rockefellers and the Carnegies, going back to the 30s, then you start to really understand where all this stuff comes from. And it's unfortunately, it's not a philanthropic, we're here to save the world endeavor at all. And we can see that now, fast forward 100 and whatever years, we can see that now play out because we have a pandemic industry that has been born. And I say a pandemic industry because, I've spent a lot of time, that's how we know each other. I spent a lot of time looking at the World Health Organization, things like the international health regulations, the pandemic treaty, and so forth. And you can see, once you understand what those agreements are about, what you see is that these are trade deals where you have revolving doors between governments, between NGOs, and between corporations. And that's it. So if you manufacture emergencies using, cooked up genomic sequences in a lab using a computer, and then you're also the person who is making the countermeasures and the vaccines and the PPE and whatever, and then you foist that on the public, you essentially have a pandemic industry. And the moneymaker there is the vaccines, right? So that there's a long, look, that's just the potted bio, if you will. But there's lots of gaps you can fill in along that road,
So much of the manipulation and mind control exerted on the general public to comply with unscientific mandates and protocols wouldn't have worked if we understood the power of programming and how it's used by governments and media. Not just as a whole, but individually. Until we understand our own personal programming, our own susceptibility, we are at risk. This is why I became a certified self-sabotage coach, studying with world-renowned mind control and health expert Jason Christoff. I could see my own susceptibility. I learned about how the programming all around us worked to keep me from thriving physically, intellectually, financially. We're living in extraordinary times, and we will either succumb to the constant negative programming or we will become alchemists and transmute our challenges into victories. We will become the people we've been waiting for. If you're interested in working with me, either in a group or one-on-one, as a coach or a speaker, email me at michelle@gatheryourwits.com and let's have a conversation. Now back to my conversation.
What would be good starting points for people? So I'm going to suggest one. So first of all, looking up the Flexner report. So for me, that was like a first kind of that a chiropractor of mine many years ago had suggested I look into. And then just more recently, someone gave me a little book called, I think it's called Unvaccinated.
Okay.
It's just a really slim little book, and it's very approachable. And I'll put them all in the show notes, but it's from a parent's point of view and as his own discovery, his own research, all his expectations, the surprises along the way. So it's very approachable for people. So I'm wondering, like, how do you educate people? What do you recommend people do so that they can really understand the whole pharmaceutical, big medical, industrial complex?
Yeah. I mean, look, it's a beast of a topic to wrap your head around, first of all. And again, I said this to my wife recently. I said, I wish I could give you one book that explains it all, but it's 25 years of what's in my head. So it's difficult, there's things that you read along the way where you're like, wow, that really kind of shaped me. Some of them are really off the wall, but they cut, they cut. And one of the first books that I read, again, just I have to sort of qualify this because it's the world we live in now, is like I'm not attached to any of these people. I don't personally know them. A couple of them I've met from time to time. So these are just books that kind of like help me to understand things. And one of them is called, it's a book by Dr. Leonard Horowitz. Leonard Horowitz, again, like he's moved into a completely different space and whatever. And some people are like, oh my gosh, he's a complete crackpot, but he's a very, very smart guy. And he wrote a book, I don't know, it's many, many years ago now, called DNA Pirates of the Sacred Spiral. And so it's a hard,
good title.
It's a harder read because he leaves no stone unturned. So his books and some of his earlier work, he's also got another one, Ebola, AIDS, and Emerging Viruses, which kind of like give you the backstory of the HIV and all these things. And of course, you got to remember these books were written, 30 years ago. So obviously we've learned more since then. But even at that time, he was just exposing things for what they are, IG Farben and what happened at the end of World War II and these types of things. Again, the Carnegies, the Rockefellers, and so forth. So that was a good one. But something that's actually digestible for people, you can look this up. It's freely available online, is just look up The Vaccine Guide. Okay. It's just called The Vaccine Guide. It's a very simple digital booklet. And what it has is it has all of the childhood vaccines in there. It has all of the ingredients. It has all of the inserts and the side effects and everything else. And that's all. The only sources they use for that are official sources. So these are taken straight from the pharmaceutical inserts, from PubMed, from what have you. And I find that's probably my number one go-to in terms of, if you just want to understand the vaccination side of things, great. It's a cool, digestible resource. If you want to understand a little bit more about just like, there's something called iatrogenic death or iatrogenic harm, which is, essentially death by modern medicine, or death by doctor, or being injured by properly prescribed, properly taken medications. And there's a
number 3 cause of death.
Yeah, exactly. And I mean, the numbers sort of fluctuate. Some say it's number 1. For sure, it's number 3. But there's a book, there's a great book by Carolyn Dean called Death by Modern Medicine. And so, it's not a very long book, but that's got all of the data in there. It's got all of the numbers and stuff like that. And so you can see. But I think, so have a look at that. It's called Death by Modern Medicine. And there's like 25 pages of references at the back of that book. And what they uncovered there is that, as you said, iatrogenic death and harm is the third leading cause of death. Okay, so that's properly prescribed, properly taken. I think if you add in medical blunders, if you add in some other things, that number is going to go up to number 1 or 2. And who knows where that number is today, because that book is a little bit older, so I don't know that anyone's replicated that work or has written a book similarly, for today. So I think on the vaccination side of things as well, if you look at VAERS, the Vaccine Adverse Events Reporting System in the US, that's been running for quite some time now. And I know Dr. Jessica Rose is she's really a biostatistician. She understands those numbers much better than I do. But even VAERS, they did their own internal audit. And they basically said that less than 1% of vaccine injuries are even reported. And I've said this, especially during the pandemic, I said to people, and today, even right now, I'll say it, ask your physician how you would go about reporting an adverse vaccine event, right? So in other words, a side effect or a vaccination. Go and ask them how you would report that. And I'll tell you right now that most physicians don't even know where to find that information. They have no idea how to file it. Even if you file it in Canada, if you look at the COVID side effects and death, the percentage that actually have been approved, right? So you have to submit your application. It goes through an approval process. Then they say, yes, we agree that you were injured by the COVID shots. That number is infinitesimally small. So my point in sharing all of that is, when you understand that, you've got this massive body of people that, one, even if they believe that they were vaccine injured, for them to get that acknowledged officially is slim, right? That's not going to happen. 2, the vast majority of people who have actually suffered some type of vaccine injury are completely unaware that it's related to the vaccine. They don't realize that their autoimmune disease or whatever is on the insert. They have no clue that it's related to the shots. And again, this is backed up by these reporting systems. Yeah.
I'm struck by 2 things. One is the absolute moral failure over the last several years in vilifying people who did what they were told to do, and then were injured, were harmed, and then being vilified as if they did something wrong, as if they went against the narrative. But I mean, it's quite shocking that we have that we failed immorally, not just failed in so many areas in terms of dealing with an apparent crisis or creating a crisis, but that what do you attribute to that failing?
That is a very big question, and I'm going to do my best to answer it because I have some ideas. I think that part of this, I've started discussing this a little bit on my own show, is this this idea of shaping narratives, right? Shaping beliefs. And I think that when you look at the media, I think the media is wholly complicit in this, first of all, ongoing, right, to this day. So, people have historically, we've trusted our institutions, right? I'll get to medicine and science in just a minute. But we've trusted these institutions. We've trusted media. Media, I had Rodney Palmer on my show, and I asked Rodney, I said, what's the whole purpose of media? What's the job of the media? And he said, the media is there to inform people. And I'm like, okay. So historically, there's there's a car accident on the street corner and the local guy goes down. Hey, there's a car accident on the street corner. It's a white car. There were two people driving it. This is what happened. End of conversation. Now the media has to shape some kind of narrative around that event. So it can't just be about that, right? We have to now tack on some things, and we decide whether we want to report on things or not. We decide how we report on those things. And, I don't have to even get into this because I think most people are aware, but how is it that consistently we see the same parroted narratives that are being trotted out by mainstream media? Whatever the topic is, it's like unanimously, you just get the same lines, the same headlines, the same talking points across all the media. So I think that's a big one, right?
Can just interject one
please,
small thing,
please.
And I want you to keep going.
Please.
So I worked in television for many years. I worked in lifestyle television. So it wasn't news, but I worked in a television station and I edited in a newsroom. And the biggest shock for me in first stepping into a newsroom was to see that most of the people there, and I'm not saying this is everywhere, although today I would assert that it probably is, but particularly in television news, that these were not people with journalism training. There was no investigation going on. There was no understanding of political science. I just assumed as a young woman that people who worked in a news department would have some breadth of knowledge and education. The second thing is that most of the news, and certainly the big picture news, came from press releases.
Yeah.
So if you think about it, your local news station is not going to cover the WHO. They're not going to cover a big event in the US. They're getting press releases, which explains why so much of the same narrative is coming out in the exact same words all over North America, certainly. Anyway.
Yeah. Well, I think there's that. Plus, you've only got like a handful of news outlets actually in the world. I forget what the names are. But, I mean, Reuters would be one. And so, everyone's sort of like all of the media companies are getting their stories from Reuters or from the European. There's another European one. So there's like only 5 or 6 of these organizations. And I did a whole podcast a couple of years ago called Who Are They? And part of that was the media, so who controls these media companies? And lo and behold, they're all controlled by the same people. So if you wanted to control a narrative, what you would do is you would actually feed Reuters and these 5 or 6, central organizations the same story. That would then permeate out into your local newspapers, your CBCs, your global news, whatever. But I think we actually have an even bigger problem in Canada because now we have media that's actually being funded by the government. So that's a huge problem. But I think, to sort of tack on another area here is the social media side of things. So when you bring in social media, certain narratives get amplified for sure. Narratives are polarizing. I think that's a big one, and social media algorithms are designed to do that, so if I'm sitting there and I decide that I click on a picture of a dog, the algorithm says, oh, you like dogs, and off you go. So we're going to show you more dogs. And you might be looking at a picture of a cat, and you go, oh, you like cats. There you go. And you will never see a dog, and I will never see a cat, because the algorithm says you are not interested in that. When you understand that and you start talking about narratives, what is happening now is we're seeing this massive polarization, and we're seeing people being corralled into these echo chambers, right? So when you put all this together with censorship, okay, which is now also happening with social media, but censorship can happen by omission as well. And so if you look at media, you now have censorship by omission a lot of times, right? So they're just not going to run the story. They're just not going to tell you anything. And I think to circle back to your question, I think these things have really, really shaped, you asked me why, how did we have such a moral failure? I think that people got completely blindsided and hoodwinked, and propagandized into believing a certain narrative. I spoke with Bruce Party, and we're chatting about the legal side of things, right? And I said to him, Bruce, if I go to the courts, let's say I didn't comply, or I didn't quarantine or something like that, and now I go to the courts, like, what leg do I have to stand on? And he said, well, you can try and exercise your rights, but unfortunately the courts have to interpret that into the prevailing narrative. So if the courts believe that the virus was dangerous, or the COVID shots were safe and effective, or whatever the prevailing narrative is, if they believe that, then your rights, unfortunately, are going to be viewed through that lens. So it's easy once you start unpacking this to see how people, how their beliefs are shaped, right? And the last thing I'll add, and then I'll shut up, is
Please don't.
is the way that culture has been shaped. So I think, I've said this for a long time. I said, I realized that Canadians, by their nature, are very good people. The quintessential, overly polite, do no harm kind of Canadian. And our public health agencies and our authorities, they took advantage of that over the last 4 years. Big time, right? Because, who wouldn't want to protect your neighbor? Who, so if you didn't comply, if you didn't toe the line, then you were touted as this, you're putting other people in danger, you're a grandma killer, you're not doing your part for society, these types of things, right? And I think that when you play on people's emotions and their psychology, most people, unless you are immune to propaganda, would say, oh my gosh, yeah, I wouldn't want to do that. Why would I want to be seen as the odd man out? Why would I want to be seen as the person who's not doing their part, right? That's a terrible thing to do. And so when you put all these things together, I think it's easy to see not just how the average citizen went along with things, but it's also easy to see how our trusted, medical professionals, doctors, scientists, etc., also went along with it.
What you talked about, those who were immune to propaganda.
Mm-hmm.
Who and why? Why are some people? This is like the central question that I have. Why do some people see through that? Why do some people are resist that? Or, yeah.
Yeah, I haven't got that quite figured out. I mean, my background, I grew up in South Africa, right? So I grew up in apartheid. And so I watched I wouldn't say the rise of it because I was quite young, but I was certainly born in the height of it all. And, when I was a kid, like the whole, whites only beaches was full on, it was full on. I also watched the fall of apartheid, so now it's been 30 years. But when I was a teenager, when I was in high school, I watched apartheid fall. The reason why I bring that up is, for me personally, I grew up in a place where I think that people just have an inherent mistrust of government. Okay, so if the government tells you to do something and they're really pushing you to do that thing, most people are going to be like, no, there's something wrong here, right? But I also think that there's people who are just critical thinkers, right? It's a combination of critical thinking, and it's also a combination of, I don't know how to word this properly, but it's like having I don't know if it's the strength, if it's the conviction, I don't know what that is, to stand your ground. To sort of say, hey, listen,
Yeah.
So the critical thinking piece, let's talk about that, because I think that in the early days of the pandemic, okay, now what we're seeing is mass propaganda across all different types of stories, right? We are firmly in narrative warfare. We are firmly in fifth generation warfare, in a very big way. But I used the pandemic because it was a great on-ramp in terms of discussing this. So I think in early March of 2020, February 2020, I think most people that you spoke to were like, hang on a second, we don't know what this thing is. We don't know what's going on. I should probably stock up on water, well, toilet paper, because that's what everyone did. And, I should probably I should probably be a little bit careful, right? Maybe. And then there were people that kept on with that, right? And then there were other people that sort of said, well, hang on a second, right? Why, if we're supposed to be in lockdowns and I'm driving down the highway, why are they installing 5G towers in the middle of a pandemic? That seems kind of weird. That doesn't seem essential to me, right? Then I drive past the hospital and I'm like, well, the news is telling me that the hospitals are overflowing. I'm going to go check this out for myself. So I go to the hospital. I went multiple times. I go to, because remember they had dedicated COVID entrances, right? I drive there, I sit in the parking lot for a little bit and look. I'm like, I don't see anyone here. Where are the people? Like, this is a busy hospital. This is a city hospital. Where are the people? I see a couple of nurses and what have you having smokes out the back door. I don't see any ambulances. I don't see anyone. I don't see a soul. So if you start looking at that and then you start going, the numbers, okay, let's talk about the numbers. The numbers started lying right out the gate. So it takes that's what I mean by critical thinking, right? It's not that we have to be conspiratorial in our thinking. It means that critical thinking says, hang on, is what I'm hearing, is that matching up with what's actually going on? And, the pictures of people dropping dead in China and all that stuff, we didn't see any of that here. So I'm like, this is not adding up. And then that's where I think there was divergence, right? And people started to go, something's not right here.
I think I'd really want to go back to something you said in the beginning, because it really fits here. When you talked about people getting stressed and worried about all the things that are happening in the world based on what they're seeing online, on TV, and not being out in nature, like going out and having a barbecue or a bike ride. But it's the same thing. How many people actually went to a hospital?
Yeah.
How many people actually thought about, okay, I saw somebody dropping dead on TV, but I've never actually seen that here. So, I mean, and I understand that's how fifth generation warfare works. That's how propaganda works. That's how mind control works, is, you inundate people with the same message over and over again. You put them in a state of fear, and they're no longer using their prefrontal cortex, right? They're no longer using that critical thinking. So I understand how it could happen. What is it that we can do to protect ourselves from that? I mean, I guess, again, awareness, is one thing. Why is it that you had the capacity to see that, to do that?
Yeah.
Why others have the capacity and some don't?
I think for me, I can only speak for myself. I mean, personally, I think that because I'd been looking into a lot of this stuff for half my life, it was different for me, because I feel for people, for the people that have, like, I hate to use the word woken up because it sounds condescending. I don't mean it like that at all. But for the people that have realized, like, just in the last 4 years, I can't imagine what it must have been like to, like, within 6 months or a year or whatever it is, to be sitting there going, holy smokes, like, what is actually going on here? And I've now woken up to this corruption, this fraud, this thing that's been foisted upon us. I've now woken up to this, and to suddenly have your entire worldview shattered, your core beliefs shattered, right? I don't know what that would feel like, but I would imagine it would be incredibly difficult to reconcile. Okay, for me, it was a much longer on-ramp to all of this stuff. You know what I mean? Because I'd already been talking about a lot of things. I mean, I was shadow banned, not even shadow banned. I mean, they told me they were kicking me off Facebook on 2018 already. So
What were you banned for?
I broke a measles. There was a measles outbreak in Samoa. And so I did a story on that, and I had a scientist, I'm trying to remember, scientist researcher woman who was on the ground. She's a Kiwi. She was on the ground, and so she spilled the beans about what was actually going on. And so I released that podcast. It went viral, and then 3 weeks later, Facebook messaged me and said, yeah, your Facebook page is done. No one's going to see anything anymore. And that was it. So to this day, I don't really post anything on my Facebook page because no one sees anything. So again, like these types of stories and understanding this leading into it, I think it was a little easier for me to sort of accept what was going on. Again, the gravity of things and the extent to which, they implemented these policies was on a whole different level. So, I also want to be clear, like I had a very, very difficult time during the pandemic because I felt very alone. Then that's the other thing, right? I felt super isolated. I felt very alone. I was like, here I am talking about all the stuff. I lost a lot of friends. I got eviscerated on social media for speaking out. And then slowly as time went by, it's like, I had to take a break. I just had to take a break. I'm not really active on Facebook at all. I'm kind of, creep back out on Instagram now and obviously a podcast. But it was tough, there was like a good, 2 years where I was like, man, but I finally found people, who like close to me, like in my community. And I was like, okay, great. I'm not alone, because it was hard. Yeah.
I want to ask you about that because I think it's one of the reasons people don't speak out or stand up.
Yeah.
It's because they've observed what happens when you do. I mean, you may have answered this already by saying you found a community, but how do we encourage people to stand up? Because personally, I think that standing up for what you believe in, being true to your values, to your principles, is actually the most rewarding way to live. And so for me, there's like an inherent self-interest. It's empowering to be, even when things are difficult, even when you're being criticized, it is empowering to know that you are trued up. Do we encourage people? How do we encourage people? What is perhaps a practice? I don't want to say a solution, but what is a practice that we can take on in order to live in that empowered state?
Yeah. I mean, look, it's a great question. I think that there's a couple of things to sort of address there. The first one is like, the pioneer that walks out with arrows in his back. It's not a fun place to be, okay? Because you were leading the charge, you were out there, out front, and yeah, you need to. I don't have a thick skin, right? I'm an empath. I'm very sensitive in a sense. That's what makes me a good practitioner. So please don't think I'm like bulletproof or anything like that. When you step out front, right, the thing that keeps me going, someone asked me recently on a podcast, they said, like, what gives you the strength? Like what that is like, is coming back to your core beliefs and your core values, right? What are they, right? So for me, truth, justice, these are core values for me. So I can't not do that. Like, it's just who I am, right? I can't not do it because then I feel like I'm lying to myself, So there's this concept in Shambhala, in the Shambhala tradition, which is an Eastern tradition, and the concept of bravery, right? So it's like, what is bravery? Okay. So when people think of bravery, they always think of, okay, I'm going to be brave. I'm going to like suit up and I'm going to be tough and like, let's go, ready to do this. Well, bravery, it turns out in that tradition, is actually the courage to be yourself. Okay, that's what bravery is. Bravery is the courage to be yourself. So if you understand what your core values are, if you understand what your non-negotiables are, and then you step into bravery and you have that's what courage is, then you can only speak your truth. There isn't anything else you can speak, because otherwise you're lying to yourself, right? And that will, over time, that is actually going to eat away at you and it's going to erode at you for sure. Okay. Now, it doesn't mean we all have to be the tip of the spear. Okay, I just happen to be the tip of the spear in many cases because I've been looking at it for longer, right? So I'm going to be, breaking some stories on my podcast that are going to really rattle the cage because some people are talking about them, but most people are not. Just like I did in the pandemic. But for other people, like, I get it. I've got a bit of a platform. I'm not a big figure at all, but if I had no platform, right? So let's just say I was a regular old person, okay? One of the most empowering things you can do is simply to start talking about this with people that are closer to you, okay? And don't start, we had this discussion with lawyers for like weeks and weeks and weeks on end. And I we were trying to craft a message about this whole thing that was going on with the WHO, right? So the IHR amendments and the pandemic treaty. And I said, listen, we got to get a whole bunch of people together. Let's sit down and we need to find what is the message that's going to move the 50% of the people in the middle. How do we curate that? And so we spent 8 weeks talking about that, right? And it was very insightful because if you're trying to reach people and you're trying to get people to change their mind or to see what you're seeing or to, just open their mind a little bit, the starting point cannot be at the extreme. Okay, you can't walk around and say, oh my gosh, Bill Gates is trying to kill everyone. And there you go. Like that's just going to, for the person who has no clue what's going on, that is not going to land well with them. Okay. So if you start in the middle a little bit more with something that's easier to digest, that's a bit more moderate, what's going to happen is A, you're actually going to open up a conversation, which is good, right? B, you're not opening yourself up to complete evisceration and an attack, which is also good for you, okay? So I think that if we can do this on a micro scale, if people keep doing this on a micro scale and we all start doing it, the landscape has completely changed now, where even for myself, like I feel more comfortable publicly speaking about this because I'm not getting attacked like I did in 2020 and 2021, So just, keep that in your back pocket as well as you start making more noise. There's a whole bunch of people that are right there with you, that support you, and that are that share your opinion on things.
There's so much that you said. First of all, I'm a Libra too, and truth and justice. It's like somebody early on said, well, why are you doing this? Why are you doing this? And I kept answering, but you know how you sort of dig deeper.
Mm-hmm.
And I finally just, kind of threw up my hands. I said, because it has to be done.
Yeah.
Because it just has to be done because we have to live inside of truth and justice.
It's also like, I think about it for my kids, you know what I mean? It's like we're living through incrementalism, like plain and simple. Like the world that we live in now is completely different from the world that we lived in 10 years ago. And so if you look at the cultural shift, if you look at just what's going on a broader scale, what's going to happen in the next 10 or 20 years? What sort of like core values, whatever those values are, like what pieces of our identity are going to be gone? And I just think about that for my children, So, like for me, like, look, if I didn't have any kids, let's just hypothetically say that, I could go anywhere. Like I'm a survivor, I can go anywhere. I'll go live on the beach. I could go anywhere. But that's not the point. The point is that there isn't anywhere to run to. And so you have to then come back to this whole idea. Well, if there's nowhere to run to, then what are you going to do? You either lie down and you take it and you accept what it is, or you stand up and you strap your boots on. It's really that simple. In my mind, anyway.
I want to take those questions and move them into health because this is your area of expertise.
Sure.
So questions about what are we living into, what's next, all of that. Take us through what you see now and what you exist.
Some very exciting stuff. There's some very very exciting things. I think that one of the silver linings of what's happened over the last 4 years has been that people have really woken up to the medical system and to the pharmaceutical system and that whole side of things, right? They sort of said, wow, if we were lied to about certain things, what else are we being lied to about? Okay, so there's that. I think as well, what I've noticed, even, for the last like 5 to 8 years, there's been a real fundamental paradigm shift in the way that we view health and disease. Complete paradigm shift, right? My field, when I graduated 20 years ago, there were 14 people in my graduating class. That's it, 14 people, okay? I know a few of them still to this day. And now, you've got schools that are cranking out 500, 1,100, 1,500 graduates like every semester.
And you're talking about specifically about
alternative health. Just call it alternative health. Yeah, whatever modality you want to slot under there. So what's happening is you've got this shift where people have, the clients that I worked with, I mean, the worst of the worst, in terms of like, so when I speak about these things, it's not my opinion or things that I think might be happening. It's like what I've heard from people for years and years on end. I've listened to their stories. I've watched them cry. I've read the lab reports. I've read the doctor's prescriptions. I've read all these things, right? And not just one person, hundreds and hundreds of people. And so what's happened is people are now starting to realize, well, hang on, like I did what I'm supposed to do. I went through the doctors. I went through the specialists. I took the drugs. I got the surgery. And I'm still sick. In fact, in some cases, I'm worse off. So there must be an alternative. I'm looking for something else. And, so what's happening is, I'll frame this another way, is people think that what people like me do, they're like, oh, you're not a doctor. I'm like, correct, I'm not a doctor. When I go to the US, everyone's like, Dr. Brett. I'm like, don't call me a doctor. Okay, I'm not a doctor. Because they believe that, alternative health is like this bastard stepchild of allopathic medicine, which it's not. The way that we've
allopathic medicine.
What's that? Sorry.
I said it preceded allopathic.
Yeah, exactly. Like this is not the alternative, actually with the original, Yeah. So sure, some of the quantum devices and newer stuff is new, but generally speaking, naturopathic medicine, alternative medicine is old school, right? So the way that these two systems work are fundamentally and diametrically opposite to one another. So in an allopathic model, right, a conventional Western model, the health is viewed as the absence of symptoms, right? So if you don't have symptoms, you're healthy. Well, I can plow you full of drugs. Like I can, you can go through surgery, you can go on immunosuppressants, you can be stuck on anti-inflammatories, bipolar medication, whatever it is, and you can suppress those symptoms and you can mask them. And when you mask them and suppress them, there's two things that happen. One, you've created the illusion of health. Okay, you're not actually healthy. Two, you drive them deeper into your body. And as you drive them deeper and deeper, according to Ayurvedic medicine, eventually you land up at the blood and the bone. And these are chronic degenerative diseases, right, that have happened over a long period of time. This is the classic path that most people who are in the allopathic model, they're on one prescription, then they're on two, then they're on three, then they got to get surgery, then they're managing the side effects, and so on and so forth. Now, in a holistic view of health, the absence of symptoms doesn't define health. Health is defined by optimal health, vitality, vibrancy, and I'm functioning at 80 or 90% capacity, right? Without relying on things, aside from, a good diet, maybe some basic supplementation, lifestyle, what have you, right? But the point here is that health is defined by those criteria, as opposed to merely the absence of disease. And the only way you get to that is by working at it, right? So you have to be a participant in your own health journey, right? You have to actually do things, okay? You have to take charge of your own health. You have to take responsibility. You're not just there saying, hey, doctor, what pill should I take? And then I'm going to go and, eat cheeseburgers and drink a 6-pack of beer every day, And I think that's where people are at, is they're starting to go, well, I see where we've come from, and now we're moving into the space. And that's exactly why we have these attacks that we're seeing now on things like natural health products in Canada, But on a so that's a positive thing for me to be truthful there. That's a positive thing because people like me, we've been doing this stuff for so long, and now people are starting to go, wow, I see the light, right? I can see how this works, and I think that one of the things, and I can get into this if you want, is we need to change the healthcare system entirely.
I do want to get there.
We'll
First,
get there.
One thing, two things. When you're talking about personal responsibility, because I think this is really key to all of this, right? Is personal responsibility for everything, starting with our health. It's the one thing we can absolutely control, right? Is what we do with our own bodies.
Yeah, for now.
For now, we can. And there was a quote on your website that talked about the expectation that we get sick when we get old. And I think this is a really interesting part of personal responsibility, because that would include that which we take into our minds, right? Our
100%.
thoughts, right?
Yeah.
You speak to that expectation that we get sick, because it's true. I see it in my own family.
Hmm.
My mother thinks that her degenerating body and lack of, and loss of
Yeah.
memory is just normal.
Yeah. Well, this is societal conditioning, right? If everyone around you, if that's happening to everyone, well, then it must be true, right? But if you've never been told any alternative before, then you wouldn't even know that there's an alternative, right? Sort of like saying to the fish, "Hey, how's the water?" And he's like, "What's water?" You don't know any different, right? So, my sort of like foray into that, understanding that happened to me when I was very young, right? So, I remember I spent quite some time in the hills in northern Thailand, right up in the mountains, and sort of spending time with indigenous people there, hiking around and that sort of thing. And I would see these like women, old men, like short, like 5'4", carrying like 100 pounds of rice on their back with like wooden straps. You know what I mean? Barefoot, straight through the mountain. Boom, off they go. And they would out hike you. Like they would they would pass you. You would never see them again. They were gone. So I was like, huh, that's interesting, right? But even growing up where I grew up at that time, old people just got old. Like my grandmother died with all of her faculties. She was in great shape. She was just frail. She was old. She was 92, right? I watched my other grandmother, who was my step grandmother. She died when she was 102. So I've just like my family, when we don't have strong genetics or anything, it's just that we haven't been poisoned like people in North America have, and the West. So when I came to North America, one of the first jobs I got was, I was young. I had to get a job under the table. Maybe cut that one out for the government. I don't know. But anyway, so I had to get this.
There a statute of limitations?
Yeah, hopefully. I don't know. You never know in this day and age. But anyway, so I had to get this.
You were just joking.
Exactly. I was just joking. Wink, wink. So I had to get this job in a nursing home. And I was like a maintenance guy in a nursing home. And a friend of a friend helped me out to get that job. And that's where I really started to notice. I was like, wow, like these people, like most of them had Alzheimer's or dementia of some kind. They were old. They were fed absolute garbage, right? I couldn't believe it. And I was like, can't you give these people better food? Like, recompressed steaks and box mashed potatoes and all sorts of stuff. And it's like, no, that's just, we're on a budget. The Ministry of Health, this is what they allocate. And that was like a big aha moment for me where I was like, wow, these people have just been put here to die. Like they're not getting out of here. There's no way. And so then I started looking into this more, and you start looking at the blue zones. You start learning about the Hansa tribe. So the Hansas up in the mountains of Pakistan and Afghanistan, up in the Himalayas, they would, people are living to be like 130, 140 years old. Bright spark in their eye, having children. 60, 70 years old, having kids. You know what I mean? And so that sort of opened my eyes to this whole idea that you have choices in life, and those choices will dictate the outcomes. Now, you can't, you can control genetics, sure, but there's certain things, that are beyond your control, and you can do the best you can. But I think what I see out there is I see people sort of, there's lots of hand waving going on, and it's like, well, that's what we do, right? Because that's what everyone does. And, this white coat syndrome where it's like, oh, well, I'm not responsible for anything, right? I just got to do what the doctor tells me, and then there you go. And if everyone is getting sick by the time they're 70 or 80, that's just the way it is, right? But it doesn't have to be that way.
This is so good. What is it that there's so much information now around health, so much alternative information.
So much. Yeah.
How do you recommend, advise people to discern what is right for them?
Yeah, that is probably one of the most difficult questions, because I get it all the time, right? So what's right? Who's right? Okay. This comes down to the concept of bioindividuality. So it's like, what's working for you? Okay, what works for you might not work for me, might not work for the next person. So there is, from a dietary standpoint, 100%, there's some trial and error. The first protocol, though, like before you start going down the carnivore road or the vegan road or whatever it is, the first protocol should really be clean up your diet.
How do you build a life in a broken system? Well, you start with yourself. You build your 5 pillars of strength: physical, emotional, mental, spiritual, and financial, so that you are strong in the face of whatever comes. We all have a tendency to self sabotage in one area or another, but I'm here to tell you that it is not your fault. We are bombarded with programming designed to keep us weak, dependent, sick, and broke. And as someone who has been weak, dependent, sick, and broke, I can tell you that you do not have to stay there. As a certified self sabotage coach, I work with clients one on one to distinguish their unique sabotaging patterns and habits. And I teach you how to reprogram for success in any area of life. If you'd like to have a conversation to see if this is a fit for you, email me at michelle@gatheryourwits.com. And now back to some empowering programming.
So if people just start there, like start with whole foods, right? So cut out the processed foods, cut out the sugar, the fake fats, the dyes, the chemicals, all that sort of stuff. Don't worry right out the gate whether you should be going paleo or carnivore or vegan or what have you. I find that for most people, if they actually start there, that's a manageable way to do things. And if you're used to a standard Western diet, which is full of all of the above, plus trans fats and what have you, you will start to notice some changes. From there, you can then decide, what works better for you. So I've had people that respond very well to more of a plant-based kind of diet. I've had other people where a plant-based diet is absolutely terrible for them, and I got to stick them on autoimmune paleo, or they go down the keto carnivore kind of road, and that works better for them. So, there is a bit of trial and error. I think with the supplement side of things, holy smokes. I mean, there's so many supplements on the market that I don't know that, someone was asking me this morning about this. Like, I'm not a huge fan of over supplementation. You know what I mean? Like, I don't think that we should be taking 30 or 40 different supplements to try and cover all the bases and, more is better and this type of thinking. I don't think that that's a good way to go about it at all. Okay. Because what typically happens is people will then use that as an excuse to eat garbage. Right. So if I eat crappy food and then I supplement, then that's fine, right? And it's like, it doesn't really work like that,
What I hear, what you're pointing to is we really actually have to shift our whole mentality from a quick fix, one thing paradigm. I love what you said about just starting with clean food. Now that's going to take some time.
Sure.
And then introducing foods or eliminating foods, that's going to take some time, where it's just easier to say, well, I'm going to do the carnivore diet because I see, so-and-so's doing it and they've lost all the weight and they feel amazing, right? Well, I can tell you from experience, I've done that. Didn't work for me at all.
Yeah.
So it really is, a much more slower approach, more reasonable, more rational, more long-term.
It is. And I think that what people need to do is they need to realize that, why are you doing it? Right? Are you doing this? Like I say this to my clients, right? It's like, if you're here for us to do this thing for 6 weeks and then you want to feel better and then you're going to go back to doing what you were doing, that doesn't make any sense, right? Because what you were doing before is the thing that got you to this place in the first place. So the goal should never be a short-term fix and then I'm going to go back to the 6-pack of beer, the cheeseburgers and the donuts and what have you. That doesn't make any sense, right? So what we're actually saying, we're suggesting, is that the goal here is a shift in your habits, is a shift in the way that you live your life. And that's not going to happen overnight, right? And if you can stick with that kind of plan, if you get yourself to the point where you're in maintenance mode, right, which is probably where I've been for, I don't know how many decades now, but maintenance mode means that I can still live, right? I can still, cheat if you want. I don't like calling it that, but I don't have to be a Puritan. I lived my life as a Puritan for a long time. Okay, I was hardcore about things before I had kids, and I did 3 hours of yoga every day. I was the annoying guy at the restaurant asking for the ingredient list. Like, I was that guy, right? And so it's not a fun way to live. It's a very stressful way to live. It's agonizing because you're thinking about these things all the time. But if you can get yourself to a point where you're just maintaining and managing like a healthy diet, right? A well-rounded diet, 80% of the time, don't worry about the other 20%. It's okay, because we live in this world now. Boy, I tell you, like if I did all the things that the influencers are telling me to be healthy, there's not enough hours in the day to do them all. I mean,
True.
like it's crazy, And what's happening is the wellness crowd is now using fear-based tactics to get people to be healthy, which I just find like is so counter. I mean, I don't even know what the word is. It's preposterous. I much prefer, inspiring people, right? So be aspirational. It's like if your goal is to, there's two ways people are motivated, right? One is by fear and one is by reward. If your motivation is by fear, you will never ever achieve your long-term goals. It doesn't matter what it is, whether it's business, whether it's health, relationships, it doesn't matter. And the reason why is as soon as there's no more fear left to motivate you, you're not motivated. You're not going to keep doing it, right? So a great example of this is weight loss, right? So can you imagine, I sit around all winter, I'm eating Twinkies, I'm flipping channels, whatever, and I put on my 20 pounds, and then I go, oh boy, like 20 pounds, like, man, I'm not feeling so good here. I better get into the gym because I don't want to put on more weight, right? I don't want my inflammation or my pain in my knee to get any worse. So all of these fears that I have are the thing that's driving me. Well, I go to the gym, I lose the 20 pounds, and then I go, well, I don't have to go every day now. That's fine. I'll just go once a week. Well, I'm actually doing pretty good, right? Then what happens is the 20 pounds start creeping back on. Okay. That's it's called the rubber band effect. Okay. So it's constantly doing this the whole time. So contrast that to what is your reward, and I've had to sit down with myself about this for my own health, is to sort of say, like, why am I doing this, right? Because I want to be the best version of myself. I want to be as strong, as sharp-minded as I can. I want to be able to pick up my young children like I'm an older father, right? I have a 4-year-old. It's my youngest child. I don't want to be an old 60-year-old. I want to be a young 60-year-old. I want to be vibrant. I want to be healthy. I want to be strong, right? So these are aspirational, reward-based motivations as opposed to fear, okay? And they will always be there because I will always drive myself to be better and better, right? Not to the point where I'll kill myself, but the point is that there's something that's future forward as opposed to constantly looking in the rearview mirror, hoping that something's not going to come back,
Let's talk about the future forward of health.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. There's something, I've been saying it for a while, and the idea is kind of marinating a little bit more now, and we're kind of moving down the road. But, this is what I was talking about in Geneva, right, is you cannot put the old tracks, the old train back on the old tracks. Okay, that's what people are trying to do right now. They're saying, the healthcare system's broken. We need ethics in medicine. We need this, we need that. We need better doctors. And I'm like, nope, because the problem is, it goes back to what I was talking about before. The fundamental premise of Western medicine is flawed in terms of, this whole idea that we must appeal to the authorities to fix the system so that the system can be better. The system is working exactly as intended, right? And that is to keep you sick, to make money off your sickness, and to keep you trapped in the system. That's what it's designed to do. I have no grand illusions that is going to be dismantled anytime soon. Okay. Instead, what we can do is we can say, why don't we build a parallel system? Okay. Now, parallel system is not a replacement for Western medicine. I need to be clear about that. It's not like I want to go and build a natural emergency room and I want to do holistic surgery or whatever. No, right? It's like, if I get hit by a bus, take me to the hospital, okay? If I break my leg, I want to go to the ER, and so on and so forth, okay? What we're saying is that a parallel system would be driven by the principles of holistic health, which is we want to empower people to be as healthy and as vital as possible. If you put that on the front of the healthcare system, what happens is, remember, you're not reliant on anything now, right? So what happens is you put that on the front of the healthcare system, you have restored function. Okay, that's what functional medicine is. I run tests to assess metabolic function. I then restore function. Okay, I'm not masking anything. If you restore function and you get people functioning optimally and in good health, then what happens is there is less need for the system over here, which is the medical system. There's no need for the drugs, the surgery, or whatever. Okay, they're there if you need them, right? But the goal is to have less people needing that. So what actually happens here is you snuff out the old system because you just don't use it anymore. Is really that simple, okay? Now, the model that we're sort of pioneering here, and I say that very loosely because it's been done in other places, in my local community here, we've got another meeting coming up in a week or two. We're actually looking to move forward with a co-op based system, okay? And the co-op based system, I say co-op because everyone understands what that means, right? It's not a food co-op, although we're doing that too. It's a little bit different. The model is basically like this, right? If everyone pays in call them the premiums every month, the co-op fees every month, and let's just say that's $300 a month, okay? And I have 1,000 people that are part of that co-op, all right? People pay in month one, $30,000. Month two, we've got 60,000. Month three, we've got 9. And so the funds basically grow over time, okay? What then happens is those people can see practitioners, okay? Outside of OHIP, outside of government insurance, outside of all these things, right? Outside of the system. And they can then be reimbursed from the co-op. Okay, they can be reimbursed for. So if I go see a chiropractor, right? Mm-hmm. The chiropractor submits the bill and the patient gets reimbursed from the co-op, right? They're paying their fees every month, remember?
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. So, and if you know, in the beginning, there's a philanthropic element, okay? In the beginning, we have to sort of have everyone on the same page and be like, listen, this is going to take some time to develop, right? And I don't have the numbers all ironed out, but I know that this is working in the U.S. as well. There are faith-based co-ops in the U.S. that are very big, okay?
How does that work? So if I'm paying $300 a month, now, first of all, you have to be able to afford $300 a month. So what's the incentive?
Well, the incentive is do you value your health? So this is not for everyone, by the way. We're not trying to do this. This is a decentralized model. This is a community-focused model. We're not looking for people to join, right? We're not going around canvassing, okay? This is, do you value health? Are you interested in learning how to live in optimal health? And there you go. Now, you could say, so the money thing comes up a lot. So can you afford 300? Well, there's two ways to answer that, right? Is one, what would you be paying normally, right? I mean, a naturopath visit's $250, $200 alone, right? Your insurance covers maybe $250, $500 a whole year. Okay, if you got good benefits at work. So there's that. And then the other thing is, well, if you don't do that, what are you going to have to pay down the road when you're actually sick? So there is a preventative element to this as well. Okay.
It reminds me of a conversation that a friend of mine, I have a friend who's an organic farmer, who had a conversation with me many, many years ago where I rethought what I spent on food. When he said, your food should be your biggest bill, or, maybe next to rent.
Second
biggest bill. And for that reason, it is the foundation of your health. So and I have always made that a priority in my expenses is good food.
Well, so think about this as well, right? So, you pay now or you pay later. I mean, that's an old saying in my circles. But I think there's another element to this is as it grows, right? As it grows, what's going to happen is you're actually managing quite a large amount of money, okay? And what that means is the people like myself, right? I value that. I'm going to put in my 300. I'm going to get the care that I need, et cetera, et cetera. There might be some months which I don't really need. There might be some months where I need more. But what's going to happen to, you mentioned the people that can't afford it. What's going to happen when the time comes when the person really needs care and they need $3,000 worth of care in a said month? That's okay. You're still going to be able to bill that, right? It's not like you're only getting $300 of care because the fund becomes larger now. So the models that, the faith-based models in the US, you got people that are doing cancer treatment and stuff like that, billing out hundreds of thousands of dollars. They have the funds. And there's going to be the people that don't need that kind of care, but their time might come as well. right? And so that's where there is, there needs to be a shared vision with this as well. And that's also why it's not about, we thought about doing this on a federal level and all that sort of stuff. Like, I'm not interested in that at all. What I would like to do is blueprint this, get it to what works for us here, and then share that blueprint around. Like, I have a meeting soon with a guy that designs IT systems, custom IT systems. So, so that'll be another layer, is like, can we build a system that can manage all of this? And then can we get other people, can we either rent that system out, or can we let other people use the system, like duplicate that system, and then they can modify it according to their local needs wherever they are in the world, So that's the vision, and I don't have it all figured out. I'll be brutally honest there. Yeah.
Well, but it's what I hear again. It's like it's a paradigm shift, right? It's prioritizing health and not not medicine, not like fixing something when it's broken.
Exactly.
But actually, really prioritizing it, which, because of my own health journey, I had to. I have a hero's journey.
Yeah, you do. I know.
I have to go through the system and find alternatives and heal myself and find ways to do that. And I mean, 1,000 things. And my God, if I'd only spent $100 a month, a year, I mean, it was very expensive, the journey, but in the end, ultimately worth it.
Yeah, well, and I think that is actually the big barrier for people. Like, functional medicine sounds nice and all, but I think that personalized medicine for most people is really a fairy tale in this day and age. It's out of reach, and I think that, again, that's where, when you look at this model, in the beginning, it's going to be difficult, right? In the beginning, it's like, we can't have people billing out $3,000 when everyone's only putting in $300. I get that. But as time goes by, and more people join and these types of things, I think that it will work over time.
If you build it, they will come.
Totally. And I think also, like, let's just paint the road forward. I mean, let's say you had, $300 and suddenly you had 10,000 people. I don't know. You're working with a large slush fund. Like, could we take some of that money and help start up another one? So here's a bit of a cash injection to get you started. Here's 50 grand, 100 grand, whatever it is. Throw that in the pool and get yourself started, and off you go. So now those people can hit the ground running, as opposed to starting it from scratch, which is what we have to do.
So let me ask you two kind of final big questions. Who knows where they'll lead? But one is, we've talked about health, we've talked about propaganda, we've talked about why people true up, we've talked about spirituality, we've talked about so many wonderful things. How do these all fit together in your world?
Oh man, whew, that was a lot to unpack. I think that to put it simply, I think we're at this pivotal moment in human history, to tell you the truth. I think that there's no turning back. The old world that we knew is gone. I think we've turned a corner where we're set on a different trajectory right now. And I think what a lot of people are waking up to is that everything that they've been told, that they've been taught, that they thought were true, is either a lie, right? Or it's distorted, or it's just not true, And so I think that there is this sort of, like, what people call the Great Awakening or a mass awakening. I don't think it's, I won't get religious or anything like that. Suffice to say that I think that a lot of people are waking up to this idea that, like, hang on, like, I'm questioning everything now. Like, I've lost faith and trust in the institutions that I trusted before. Where do we go from there? And I think that there is, right now, we're feeling our way in the dark, for sure. There's a lot of that going on, especially at the front end. We're feeling our way in the dark. We're not sure exactly where we're going. But, like I've said, I keep saying this, the antidote to globalism is localism, right? And so I think that as we venture further down this road, decentralization, tapping back into your local community, getting involved at a local level, whether it's a school board, whether it's a town council, whatever that is, like, that's where we're going to go, because I think what's happened for so long now is people have just sort of carried on with their life. It's like, so long as I've got my, beer on the dock and I can watch my game of football, I'm good. And it's like, no, no, you actually, if you want to see society improve, you need to be a participant in society, and you actually need to do something, right? Because society is not this passive thing that we all get to do whatever the hell we want, and we let these, crackpot authorities and globalists run the show for us. Like that, I don't know about you, but that's not the society that I want. So if we want to change society, then we have to take ownership of that. And, with great freedom comes great responsibility, right? So I question how many people, there's a lot of chatter about freedom. Everyone talks about freedom, freedom, freedom all day long. It's like, are you actually responsible enough, and are you actually spiritually evolved enough to truly be free? And I don't know. I would question that with a lot of people, dare I say most. So we're at this time where I think that there's a revolution in consciousness, or at least there should be. And I think that together with these sort of decentralized systems, local things and so forth, I think that is, I think that's going to change the whole game.
Is there any question that you've always wanted to be asked that you would like to be asked?
Well, that's a good one. I don't know that there's any question I've wanted to be asked.
Any piece
No.
of wisdom that you want to share?
Nothing off the top of my head. I'm just trying to think if there's anything that I haven't discussed today. I think I've covered a lot. Yeah.
What is it then that inspires you? What keeps you going after being, beaten down and
Yeah. feeling
alone and all that? What keeps you going?
You know what? You come to the place of acceptance, okay? And you have to accept that what is what it is, right? This is where we're at. And if you do nothing and you just sit on your hands, and I talk about this a lot on social media and stuff like that. Every now and then I'll post and I'll just be like, listen, I know it's hard. Don't keep sticking your head in the sand. If you stick your head in the sand, then don't complain later, right? Because sticking your head in the sand doesn't make any of the stuff go away. And so I think when you come to that place of acceptance and you realize this for what it is, then you are left with a couple of choices, right? The one choice is to do nothing. Okay, I can't personally do nothing. The other choice is to do something. Okay, but what stops a lot of people from doing something is they are afraid, because they're afraid of doing the wrong thing. Okay, so the best thing you can do is the right thing. The next best thing you can do is the wrong thing. And the worst thing you can do is nothing. Okay, so I think it's good.
That's good. I'm not even going to, let's just stop there, because that's just gold.
All right.
Thank you so much.
Thank you so much. It was great to sit down and chat with you. I enjoyed it.
The worst thing you can do is nothing. So many of us are paralyzed by the fear of getting it wrong, but taking action, any action aligned with our values and principles, moves us closer to who we are and why we're here. This is my first major takeaway from this delicious conversation with Brett Hawes. Despite the costs, Brett spoke out against the COVID narrative. But he didn't just assume that his opinions, however educated, were right. He tested them. He kept an open mind and went to the hospitals to see if what the media was reporting was true. It wasn't. What I love about this small act of curiosity is that it demonstrates responsibility, not just for one's opinion, but in sharing the truth of what he observed. Brett demonstrated responsibility for the whole. The views of society are built through conversation, through communication, not just through the talking points and narratives of the government and media, but through each of us sharing what we know to be true and accurate, despite what authorities want us to believe. Brett's question, are you truly responsible enough to be free, is my second major takeaway. Many people speak about rights and freedoms, but how many of us take responsibility for them? And are we willing to? Finally, it is Brett Hawes' willingness to continue engaging with people over decades with compassion and patience that is my most impactful takeaway. In our current climate of hostility and division, it is, as Brett said, a revolution in consciousness that is needed. It is my hope that this and other Trued Up conversations help to move us in that direction. I hope you've enjoyed this conversation and will join me for more. If you'd like, share your insights in the comments section, and please hit the subscribe button. Stay tuned, be true to yourself, and remember that we are the ones we've been waiting for.